JD Vance kicked off Jimmy Kimmel's show after a heated clash. The night's guest, JD Vance, Vice President of the United States, not a movie star, not a pop singer, not a viral TikToker, an intellectual pit bull in a tailored Navy suit, a man shaped by poverty anger and a deep mistrust of the very media circus he was walking into. If Clint Eastwood walked in like a gunslinger, Vance entered like a prosecutor with his case already won. He just hadn't presented the evidence yet. Backstage tension simmered. A producer whispered sharply into a headset. "He's too calm." His aide, Anna, stoic, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who read Wall Street Journal footnotes for fun, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I told you," she muttered to the control booth. "Don't try to make him a meme. He'll make you a footnote." The director waved her off. "It's just comedy. He'll play along." She didn't smile. "You're about to find out the difference between late-night jokes and long-term consequences." Cut to Jimmy. The monologue was electric. He carved up the day's headlines with surgical sarcasm, slapped around a tech CEO, mocked a senator's awkward speech. The audience roared. Jimmy paused, smiled, and dropped the setup. "All right, folks, let's welcome tonight's guest. The man who wrote Hillbilly Elegy somehow got a seat in the White House and probably thinks this studio is a liberal swamp. Give it up for Vice President JD Vance. Cue the music. Gritty rock. A bass line that tried to sound like rebellion but came off like theme park punk." And then he walked in. No swagger, no smile, just presence. A politician who knew he wasn't among friends and didn't need to be. JD Vance shook Jimmy's hand with a grip that didn't say, "Thank you for having me." It said, "This is going to be educational for you." He sat, back straight, eyes scanning the crowd like he was reading a room full of sealed indictments. The laughter died a little too fast. Jimmy cleared his throat. "So, how's Washington still standing?" Vance said, which frankly surprises all of us. The first few minutes were cordial. Talk of policy, infrastructure, some bipartisan throat clearing. But Jimmy wasn't here for policy. He wanted a punchline. He pivoted, faux grin locked in toward Vance's roots. "So, tell us, do you still ride tractors through Ohio when you're not managing the Senate floor?" The crowd chuckled. Vance didn't. "Only when I'm not running through lazy media stereotypes," he said flatly. A few uneasy laughs. Jimmy leaned back, tried to redirect. "Hey, you're the one who called your childhood hillbilly." "I'm just quoting the memoir. I called it Elegy Jimmy. Elegy means lament, mourning, not a punchline." The studio didn't know whether to laugh or listen. Vance leaned in just slightly. "You read the title." "But I lived the story." Then came the pivot. Jimmy grinned, the surprise prop moment queued up. He reached behind the desk, pulled out a battered old camouflage baseball cap with the slogan, "Make Appalachia Funny Again," stitched in white thread. "Come on, Mr. Vice President." One quick shot for the fans. Hillbilly meets Hollywood. The audience clapped. The cue cards had worked. The viral moment was ready. The problem, JD. Vance wasn't playing. He looked at the hat, then at Jimmy, then at the studio. "Put that away," he said, "before this turns into a live demonstration of the difference between satire and condescension. Silence. Not the planned kind, not the laugh track takes a breath kind, the kind that makes producers sweat, the kind that makes viewers shift in their seats, not because something funny's coming, but because something real just cracked through the varnish." Anna Backstage didn't blink. She whispered to the stage manager, "If they keep pushing, this is going to be a civics lesson, not a skit." Jimmy tried to recover. "It's just a bit of fun, Mr. Vice President." "I'm sure it is," Vance replied, "but you know what's not fun. Watching the working class get mocked for 20 years by people who wouldn't last a week without DoorDash and Wi-Fi." The crowd gasped. Then a pocket of them clapped. Just a few. But they weren't laughing. They were leaning in. Jimmy forced a grin. "You're really not into this talk show thing, huh?" "No, Jimmy. I'm just not into the part where comedy becomes cover fire for ignorance." The air tightened. The band was silent. The cue cards blank. For the first time all night, Jimmy had nothing clever to say. Jimmy's smile was still on his face, but it had gone stiff around the edges like a painting left too long in the sun. The cue cards in his hand had suddenly turned into liabilities. The camera lights didn't feel warm anymore. They felt surgical, hot, and invasive. Vice President JD Vance hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't thrown a punchline. But the stage had already shifted. and everyone felt it. Okay, Jimmy said, finally adjusting his jacket and offering a laugh that begged the audience to laugh with him. Well, we're off to a real firecracker of a start tonight. No one clapped. No one booed either. They were listening now, not to Jimmy, but to the stillness coming off Vance like heat off asphalt. Jimmy scrambled for a pivot. So let's talk about something we can laugh about, lighter stuff. Like, I heard you had a funny moment with the Finnish Prime Minister, something about their version of barbecue. Vance didn't smile. You mean the diplomatic summit where we negotiated clean energy credits? Sure, Jimmy said, chuckling, but wasn't there a thing with the reindeer ribs? There was. I praised their culinary diplomacy, Vance said flatly, and we secured a bilateral green tech deal that reduces reliance on Chinese solar imports. Hilarious, I know. The audience chuckled nervously. Jimmy blinked, pushed back in his chair a bit. He wasn't used to this kind of resistance. Most guests danced to the rhythm of the crowd. JD Vance was changing the song, and people were starting to notice. Anna stood in the wings, arms folded. She leaned in toward a junior producer and whispered, "Watch him try to reset the tone again." He'll go personal next. She wasn't wrong. So, let's go back to Hillbilly Elegy for a second, Jimmy said, voice smooth. You said you wrote it as a tribute to your upbringing, but there's been some, criticism that it punches down. That it paints rural America like a hopeless place. Vance turned toward him fully now. That's because some people are uncomfortable when you describe the wreckage they ignored, he said calmly. I didn't write it to be inspirational. I wrote it because I was tired of watching people like my mother be flattened into stereotypes or turned into political talking points. Jimmy leaned in, sensing an opportunity. So you're saying the media doesn't understand people like your mother. I'm saying they don't try. And yet here you are, Jimmy said, his voice dipped in a smile. On a national stage, isn't that kind of proof that the system works? Vance's reply came without delay. No, it's proof I outran it. The room pulsed. That line hit hard, not because it was loud, but because it didn't need to be. The audience, unsure at first, began to shift again. Someone up front nodded slowly. A woman in the third row whispered to her friend, "That's true, though." Jimmy, feeling the shift but unwilling to surrender, tried again. You know this isn't a courtroom, Mr. Vice President. We're not here to put America on trial. Vance didn't blink. Maybe not, but America's watching anyway. Silence. Then a single clap. Then a few more. Not thunderous, but undeniable. Jimmy looked off stage, trying to catch the producer's eyes. The signal to cut was there, lingering like a hand over a panic button. But someone in the control room didn't press it. Ratings were spiking, and Vance had just taken control of the room. The cameras kept rolling. Jimmy fumbled for a reset. All right, he said, hands raised as if cooling a heated grill. Let's talk about something bipartisan. Puppies. You've got kids, right? What do they think of you being vice president? Vance didn't smile. They miss me. Sometimes they cry at bedtime, he said, voice steady. You want the polished version, or the honest one? Jimmy hesitated. The honest one he offered too quick. Vance leaned forward. They miss me because I'm gone a lot, and when they ask why I tell them, it's because I don't want them growing up in a country where truth is optional and people are punished for saying it. That wasn't a soundbite, that was a detonation. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't boo. They felt that one. Jimmy tried to swallow it with a smile. It stuck halfway. Well, he said, you really do know how to bring a room down. No, Vance said. I bring rooms back to reality. Another pause, another ripple through the studio. Someone in the back yelled, "Let him cook." And the audience half laughed, half clapped. Jimmy looked visibly rattled now. He glanced off stage again, hoping for a commercial break, but the signal didn't come. The director, watching from the booth, leaned into her headset and whispered, "Let it run. It's real. It's working." Backstage, Anna allowed herself the smallest grin. She leaned toward a tech operator. Now he'll try to corner him with something emotional. It's the only card left. Jimmy leaned forward. Okay, one last serious question, he said. Do you ever worry that maybe you're becoming the thing you hated? That rising to power changes you more than the system? Vance looked at him and didn't speak. The silence grew long, long enough that it became deliberate, long enough to hurt. When he finally did speak, it was slow and exact. No, because the difference is I'm not selling hope, I'm selling responsibility, and that doesn't change with title or lighting. He paused. And if I've changed at all, it's because I've seen what happens when we mistake applause for accountability. Dead quiet. Even Jimmy knew this wasn't his show anymore. This was JD Vance's reckoning. Not of Jimmy, of the entire machine. The air in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio had changed. It wasn't electric anymore, it was static. The kind that settles in a room just before a thunderstorm rolls in. Not loud, not flashy, but absolutely impossible to ignore. Jimmy tried to keep the smile alive. That's what he was trained to do, ride the joke skate, the discomfort redirect with wit. But this wasn't discomfort, it was dissonance. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. They were waiting. Okay, he said, chuckling into the void. You got the big words and the big title, Mr. Vice President, but let's not pretend this isn't still just a talk show. JD Vance didn't move, didn't blink. You're right, he said quietly. It's just a talk show. Then he leaned in just enough to make the cameras adjust their focus and let the next line slice the air. But funny how often just a talk show becomes a weapon. You could feel the line land, not with fanfare but with weight, like someone had dropped a truth so obvious, so clean it didn't need explanation. Someone in the audience gasped. Another person said, "Damn," under their breath. Jimmy felt it. And for the first time in years, he did something he rarely had to do on air. He blinked too fast, and he fidgeted. His fingers tapped a rhythm on the cue cards, betraying a man recalculating in real time. He went for the laugh. All right, JD, he said, smiling too widely. You win, you're the smart one. You've got the Harvard law degree, the sad backstory, the bestseller. What's next? You gonna break into tears and drop a mic? Vance didn't laugh. I didn't come here to cry, he replied. I came here because people at home think this country's a joke, and you're their favorite example. Now the crowd really turned. There were audible gasps, but also applause, not scattered, sustained. The audience, trained by decades of laugh cues and pop culture, pacing had stopped waiting for the joke. They were listening now for something true. Jimmy leaned back, blinking. Wow. So that's what we're doing now, taking down the free press on primetime television. Vance's eyes were steady. I'm not taking anyone down. I'm just not playing along. There's a difference. Jimmy tried to laugh again, but the rhythm was broken. He reached for his mug, took a sip he didn't need, and tried to keep his cool. Listen, I get it, he said. You want to be the adult in the room, the stern dad of America. But don't pretend like people didn't love you because of this very showbiz system you're trashing. You sold 1 million copies of a memoir, JD. Come on. Vance didn't argue. He agreed strategically. I did. I told the truth. It resonated. And then this industry tried to turn my truth into theater. He paused. But I don't do reenactments. I do policy. Another ripple in the crowd. This time the cheers came with it. Jimmy looked around briefly, confused that the room, the one that always belonged to him, was now disobeying. That's the thing with you guys, he said a bit sharper now. You want the platform, the fame, the reach until someone makes a joke. And you want immunity. Vance shot back because you wear a blazer instead of a badge. Boom. That line detonated. Jimmy tried to pivot, but the oxygen in the room was gone. Vance kept going, not louder, but firmer. I grew up in places where the only comedy was a coping mechanism. Where the TV wasn't laughing with us, it was laughing at us. And you know what happens when people feel mocked long enough? Jimmy said nothing. They stop listening. Then they stop trusting. Then they vote for someone who doesn't smile at cameras. That's how we got here. The room exploded. Half the crowd stood. Some clapped. Others just stared. But the tension had inverted. The show was no longer a light comedy with an edge. It was a confrontation that millions would be watching on loop before the night was out. Jimmy exhaled slow. All right, he said. I think we need to take a quick commercial break. He looked toward the wings. The floor manager was frozen. The producer had his hand half raised. The director's voice crackled in a headset. Don't cut. This is nuclear. Let it ride. Jimmy tried to ignore the silence. You came here for airtime, JD, he said, half snapping. Congratulations. You're trending already. I didn't come for airtime, Vance replied. I came because Americans deserve to know that not every public servant needs a laugh track to tell the truth. Someone yelled yes from the back of the room. The chant started in the corner. Let him speak. Then louder. Let him speak. Jimmy looked at his audience, and saw it fracture. Some were still on his side, but others had clearly shifted. Not because they were Republicans, not because they liked JD Vance, but because the man had not blinked, not flinched, not folded. That kind of defiance in the face of cultural power, it landed. Backstage, Anna whispered to herself, and now comes the mic drop. But not yet. Because JD wasn't done. He stood up not to storm off, but to command space. I'll finish with this, he said. This set, this format, this entire machine, you don't have to like me. But when we start treating discomfort like danger and truth like treason, we stop being a free country. Pause. And I didn't sign up to manage decline. I signed up to interrupt it. Then he nodded. Once. And sat back down. And no one, not even Jimmy, said a word. For a full 3 seconds, the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio sat in silence. Not the reverent kind. Not the dramatic pause a writer scripts for applause. No. This was the kind of silence that drops into a room when someone said something true enough, dangerous enough, and undeniable. Then clapping. Not prompted, not cued. It started near the back, cautious but firm, like someone had waited too long to hear a politician say something that wasn't rehearsed. Then others joined. Louder, firmer. Some stood, a few booed. But the balance had shifted. You could feel it in the bones of the floorboards. Jimmy didn't stand. He didn't clap. He stared ahead, tight-lipped, as if the teleprompter had just gone blank, and his carefully threaded persona had been unspooled by a single man refusing to wear the costume. Someone backstage whispered, "We lost him." Another answered, "No, we just watched him lose us." The band tried to play something light, a jazzy riff, a sitcom-sounding attempt at reclaiming levity. It died halfway through the second bar. Jimmy adjusted his mic. His voice, when it came, was clipped. "All right," he said, forcing a grin. "That was Vice President JD Vance, everybody. And, clearly..." He had something on his chest. The crowd murmured. A few clapped, but no one laughed. JD Vance didn't move, didn't flinch. He let Jimmy dangle in his own discomfort for a full beat. Then quietly, "No, Jimmy. I had something on my conscience." Jimmy flinched. Just a twitch, but the cameras caught it. There it was. A chink in the armor. And that was all Vance needed. "You know what's funny?" he continued. "You've got an entire crew out there with buttons and scripts and applause signs, and none of them could manufacture what just happened." Jimmy tried to cut in. "Look, we're just trying to run a show here. It's supposed to be entertainment." Vance's voice stayed low, calm. "That's the problem. You think people tune in for laughs. But most of them are here because they want someone to finally say something that matters. And when someone does, you reach for the joke like it's a fire extinguisher." The audience murmured again. One man shouted, "Let him cook," for the second time that night. This time it got cheers. Jimmy leaned forward. He tried to regain control, not as a comedian now, but as a host fighting not to be eclipsed on his own stage. "You're being dramatic," he said. "This is a late-night format. You knew what you were walking into. And you knew who you invited," Vance replied. "But you wanted a viral moment. You just didn't expect to be in it." Dead hit. Jimmy's jaw tightened. "I'm not some puppet master," he said. "No," Vance said softly. "You're worse. You're the smile that laughs when the empire burns." The crowd gasped. Again some clapped, some booed. But even the boos didn't sound certain anymore. Behind the scenes, the director cursed under her breath. "This is out of control." The assistant stage manager hovered near the edge of the curtain. The security team, 2 men in black polos with earpieces, shifted closer to the stage. Anna stepped forward, cutting them off with one outstretched hand. "Don't touch him." Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The head of security hesitated, then nodded, backed off. The band stopped playing completely. On stage, Jimmy tried to pivot. One last Hail Mary. "You think you're the only one with convictions, JD. We have writers here, crew, people who work 14-hour days. You come in here and turn it into a trial." Vance didn't hesitate. "It's not a trial. It's a mirror. and I'm just the first person in months who didn't blink when you held it up." The crowd went still again, then erupted. Cheers, whistles, a few standing ovations. It wasn't political, it was primal. Someone in the audience yelled he ate, another replied and left no crumbs. Jimmy sat back defeated. This wasn't his stage anymore. The machine had cracked. Not exploded, but fractured. And through that fracture came something raw, unedited, and undeniable. JD Vance turned to the camera, not to the host, not to the band, not even to the crowd, to America. "I'm not here to shame a show," he said, "but I do think we should all ask what happens when truth stops being profitable." Pause. And what happens when it starts trending? The camera lingered. No music, no fanfare, just presence, and then cut to commercial. Only this time it felt like a surrender. The commercial break didn't feel like a break, it felt like a cover-up. Advertisements for soda insurance and car companies flickered across screens and homes across the country, some on mute, some playing at full volume, but nobody was watching them. Not really, because every phone in the studio was already lit. Every browser was already searching. Every social media platform had already exploded. Woodger Vance, on fire. Talk show takeover. Jimmy meltdown. Chachichan truth. On air on TikTok, the clip of JD Vance saying, "You're the smile that laughs when the empire burns," had hit 1 million views in under 7 minutes. On X threads were unraveling the confrontation frame by frame. On YouTube, reaction videos were spawning like wildfire. Why JD? Vance just exposed the media late-night comedy. Just died live. Jimmy got eaten alive and smiled through it. By the time the cameras turned back on in the studio, Jimmy Kimmel was no longer in charge of the narrative. The lights came back up, but they didn't bring the warmth with them. Jimmy sat rigid behind his desk, tapping his pen against a stack of now pointless cue cards. His smile was gone. His audience, the one he built over 2 decades, looked uncertain. JD Vance remained seated across from him, calm, legs crossed, posture impeccable. The only one who hadn't flinched when the room turned. Jimmy tried to muster the charm. "Welcome back," he said, a little too tight, a little too fast. "If you're just joining us, we're here with Vice President JD Vance, who's apparently decided to host the show now." Nervous chuckles. But the line fell flat. Vance didn't take the bait. "I'm happy to hand it back," he said. But let's be honest. What we just witnessed wasn't a takeover, it was a correction. The crowd was quiet again, hanging on every word. Jimmy sighed. "Look, I've done this a long time, man. I've sat across from presidents, actors, activists. You know what I've learned?" And Vance raised an eyebrow, politely inviting the punchline. Jimmy leaned in. "Everyone thinks they're the only one telling the truth." Vance nodded. "They're not, but some of us risk more to say it." Boom. Another detonation. Quieter this time, but deeper. Not a blast, an aftershock. Jimmy leaned back. "So what now? You gonna run the country with that tone if tone's your problem?" Vance replied, "You're still not listening." Backstage, Anna stood by the monitor arms, crossed phone, buzzing nonstop. She didn't check it. She didn't need to. She knew. This wasn't going to be a news cycle. It was going to be a reckoning. The director turned to the head writer. "We need to spin this. How we say it was planned. That the tension was scripted." The writer looked at the screen. Vance unmoving, composed, unshakable. He shook his head. No one's buying that. On screen, Jimmy made one last attempt at salvaging tone. "Okay, serious face-off. Sure. But you do realize this isn't Congress, right? This is late-night TV. People come here to escape." Vance's reply came quick. "And if the only way to escape is to mock what matters, then maybe it's time to stop running." Applause again. Heavier now, not polite, not partisan. Earned. Someone shouted, "Preach!" Jimmy leaned forward, almost pleading now. "What do you want me to say, JD? That we're the bad guys?" Vance shook his head. "No, I want you to admit that the story isn't always yours to tell." He gestured to the crowd. "These people, they're not props. They're witnesses. And tonight they saw something real. That's rare. Cherish it. Don't punch it down." The camera zoomed in slightly. Jimmy was blinking too often now, his throat bobbed. "You came here to prove a point," he said. So go ahead. Say your last line. Deliver the closer. Win the night. Vance smiled. Just slightly. I didn't come here to win. He turned to the audience. I came here to remind you that some truths don't ask permission. They just show up and dare you to do something with them. Silence. Then the crowd stood. All of them. No music, no comedy riff. Just the image of Vice President who didn't need applause standing in front of a system that always assumed it would get the last laugh. And then in perfect, devastating control, JD Vance stood, nodded to Jimmy, and walked off set. Anna met him in the hallway. He didn't break stride. She matched his pace. You just broke the internet. I wasn't aiming for the internet. Then what? He looked straight ahead. The mirror. Behind them, the studio pulsed with noise. Behind them, a nation was already arguing. And behind them, the system they just cracked was busy doing what it always does, spinning. It was supposed to be just another talk show taping. By midnight, it had become something else entirely. The segment wasn't even finished airing when the clips broke containment. Screen recordings flooded X, TikTok, Instagram, Telegram, Reddit, and group chats from DC to Des Moines. It wasn't polished, it wasn't filtered, and that's why it worked. There was no title card, no brand watermark, just grainy footage of a man refusing to play the game and calling out the rules while millions watched. The most viral moment wasn't even something JD Vance said. It was something he didn't say. Just that pause, that look, that stare into the camera like it was a country he didn't want to save but felt obligated to confront. By morning, Chuck to the Truth Doesn't Need Permission was trending globally. On cable, news anchors scrambled to reframe the exchange. Some called it a calculated media stunt. Others labeled it a dangerous embrace of authoritarian tones. But deep down, they all knew a nerve had been hit, and nerves don't go viral unless the pain is real. The White House communications team didn't issue a formal statement. They didn't need to. Vance hadn't attacked anyone. He'd simply told the truth with surgical calm and walked off before anyone could say cut. Inside the late-night TV world, the fallout was faster and colder. Writers panicked. Showrunners blamed the control room. Editors clipped the segment to make Jimmy's final jokes land harder, but the internet had already seen the uncut version. It was too late. Jimmy Kimmel released a tweet the next morning. Some nights you laugh, some nights you learn. Last night I did both. Thanks for watching. It was meant to soften the blow. It didn't. In the comments, the divide was unmistakable. JD Vance just turned your set into a debate stage and won. Not a fan of his politics, but that was masterclass composure. Jimmy looked like a fish trying to punch water. This wasn't left versus right. This was real versus scripted. More truth in 7 minutes than 7 years of this show. Back at the studio, the producers held a meeting. They called it a tone audit. One executive proposed never inviting sitting politicians again. Another said, "No, we just need to invite the right ones." Someone else replied, "Or maybe we need to stop inviting people who don't fear us anymore." Silence. Anna scrolled past the chaos while sipping black coffee on a hotel balcony. The view was hazy, LA sun barely breaking through smog. She looked down at her screen, watched Vance's face freeze frame mid-answer on 1,000 different thumbnails. In one clip, someone had overlaid dramatic music and slow motion. In another, they added captions like it was a Netflix trailer. It was ridiculous, but it was real. She sent him a text. They're calling it the night the studio blinked. He didn't respond. She smiled. She knew why. He wasn't scrolling. He was somewhere else already, maybe with his kids, maybe reading reports, maybe writing something no one would expect until the cameras were rolling again. And when they did, he'd be ready. Because JD Vance hadn't gone to Jimmy Kimmel Live to destroy anything. He'd gone to remind America that politics isn't performance, that truth isn't decoration, that leadership doesn't have to be loud, just unshakable. And when he said it into a room designed for punchlines, the room flinched. Because for once, someone didn't come to play along. He came to say what needed to be said, and he did. Without yelling, without smiling, without asking permission. Just one man, one chair, one set, and a mirror.